So I'm so glad that you all came today. We're very lucky to have Michele Bombardier with us, an award-winning poet and Bainbridge Islands Poet Laureate, also mixed media artist, and Dia de los Muertos co-conspirator Araceli Cruz is here. And I'm Jenna. I'm the Education and Community Engagement here at BEMA. If you don't have a notebook or you need a pencil, we have a few extras, so just raise your hand and I'll bring it to you. Okay, welcome, Michele.
Hi, everybody. We are a small but mighty group. Feel free to scooch on down close if you want. Well, I want to thank you, Araceli and Alice, for inviting me to this. When Araceli first asked me to do this reading and workshop, my first response was, no, this is not my tradition. And she said, but I've read your work, and you talk to your dead. And I said, oh, yes, I do. So she convinced me, and I'm so glad. And I'm so glad to be here with others who also talk to their dead and feel their ancestors with them, and who understand that the veil between worlds is porous. When I showed my manuscript, I have a new book I'm working on, and please, God, may it come out soon. I showed it to my husband, and he said, it's kind of deathy. And I didn't know what that meant. And then I showed it to an editor, and I told the editor, you know, my husband said that it's pretty deathy. And she said, there's no such thing in poetry as too deathy. She said, that's called spirituality. So I want to talk a little bit about the power of poetry. Yesterday was so moving. The celebration yesterday was so moving, and I was so amazed at how many people brought poems. And I think what that shows is how often, when there are no words, we reach for words. And I love that poetry is often a rectangle, on a rectangle. It's a rectangle of words on a piece of paper. It opens, it's like a window that opens from the inside to the outside, a new outside. Also, as a rectangle, I think of poetry as a magic carpet that you can climb onto it and fly to places unknown. The famous and wonderful poet Gregory Orr calls poetry a raft. And I love that idea of crawling onto that rectangle of raft, and off you go. He calls poetry a raft to climb onto when the waters of chaos rise. It's a place of safety, a way of safe passage. And if you don't know Gregory Orr's work, he has a wonderful book called Poetry as Survival, and his book that's called The Beloved Book, The Books of the Beloved. Poetry has the magical properties of poetry. You can time travel, you can move forward and backwards in time, you can go to the distant past or the future, that a poem can hold uncertainty, that more than one thing can be true at a time. I love that with death. I love in a poem that you can write, you know, you've died, you're gone, and you are always with me. All those things are true. And I love that poetry is that place of mystery, faith, and imagination where we can make the invisible visible. And of course we talk with the dead in a poem. In a poem, we can continue the conversation. Those on the other side can speak or at least show up. And in this way, the conversation continues, and with that, the relationship continues. This has been life-changing for me. My father died well over 10 years ago, and I still write about him all the time. He was a difficult father. He carried a heavy load of trauma, and I was and am a difficult daughter. Too sensitive for this world, he would tell you. Too soft. So I wrote about him. I researched. And in seeking to understand him, I wrote about his parents and his grandparents, their immigrant experiences, his war experience, World War II, Normandy, his illness, and more. And I found that the more I wrote, the more I understood, and I came to compassion for him and for myself. I came to finally be freed from the fear that cloaked our relationship that now I see as generational trauma. This is what I want to say. Through writing poems about my father, I have come to feel closer to him than ever. We have a good relationship. I treasure him. He's a force for good in my life. I called on him recently when we were caught in a flash flood. We were driving in Scotland, and there was a dip in the road, and cars were spinning out of control, and my husband decided to go through, and I was terrified, and I found myself calling on my father to help us get through this incredibly dangerous situation, and sure enough, we did it, and I was just like, thanks, Pop. It was kind of a wonderful moment. So I believe that the veil is porous, and I have found poetry to be a good messenger. The other thing I believe is that grief poems are love poems. So I'm going to read some poems, and then we're going to write some poems. We're going to write love poems, which is the same thing as a grief poem. I'm going to start with a poem that's not mine, but it's a poem that I love. It's a poem called Miss You, Would Like to Take a Walk with You by the poet Gabriele Calvor. I can hardly say this Italian name, Calvoracesi. I'm sure I said that wrong. Do not care if you just arrive in your skeleton. Would love to take a walk with you. Miss you. Would love to make you shrimp sagaki like you used to make me when you were alive. Love to feed you. Sit over steaming bowls of pilaf. Little roasted tomatoes covered in pepper and nutmeg. Miss you. Would love to walk to the post office with you. Bring the ghost dog. We'll walk past the waterfall, and you can tell me about the after. Wish you would come back for a while. Don't even need to bring your skin sack. I'll know you. I know you will know me, even though I'm bigger now, grayer. I'll show you my garden. I'd like to hop in the leaf pile you raked, but if you want to jump in, I'll rake it for you. Miss you standing, looking out at the river with your rake in your hand. Miss you in your puffy blue jacket. They're hip now. I can bring you a new one if you'll only come by. No, I told you it was okay to go. No, I told you it was okay to leave me. Why'd you believe me? You always believed me. Wish you would come back so we could talk about truth. Miss you. Wish you could walk through my door. Stare out from the mirror. Come through the pipes. Isn't that a beautiful poem? What I love about this poem of how it's a list poem, and it's a poem of direct address. So I'm going to read a couple of poems now, and I'm going to read from the manuscript from my next book and then my book, What We Do. Is that good? Okay. This poem is called Hereafter. When we buried him in the rain, the pine box bobbed in mud and water until the clods piled high enough to pin the coffin to the ground, a final buoyancy. 1 year later, at the unveiling, his mother said, "Parents who bury children believe, and who dare challenge us. We all know she's paid tuition for a higher learning, and I listen when she says presence is an emptiness, but no less present. And sorrow beads like joy, a glistening, visible and invisible in each and every drop." And this poem is called Trying to Pray. Once, I dreamt of a friend, heard the bell of her laugh, and in the morning learn she died. How can she be gone when she appears in the fog-lit woods where I walk? Don't tell me about the brain. its grid system. I know. How am I alive? This constellation of cells and muscle over bones that propel me day into night. And within this machine, inside the fisted engine in my chest and its deeper bellows, I feel something ethery, iridescent, invisible. I pray to this shaky glimmer of soul and spirit, because my dead keep knocking, because I so much want to open the door. Okay. And this poem is my response to Gabrielle's poem. This is my poem of direct address. This is called Seen and Unseen. The earrings I wore to your funeral were ones I borrowed from you that I forgot to return. I keep them on my dresser as if I'll wear them again. I'll never wear them again. I line shells and pebbles along my garden path, each a memento from our beach walks, each a whisper. I keep finding things to show you. A brass mouse from my aunt, the marble bear bookend, how books now line and stack in every room of my house. They wave little flags of torn-up envelopes because I don't dog-ear my pages with the passages I want to show you. I threw some of your ashes into the ocean in Mexico, you know. Locals said it's where whale sharks swim. You'll like that, like you now, massive, silent, hovering near the surface. I found out later that where I sprinkled her ashes was where they honeymooned. I sent a picture and sent it to her husband, and he could not believe that, and I had forgotten that piece of information. So this poem is called Missing Him. My father walked out of my dream and into the backyard last night because the dead are like that, impetuous, prone to wander, especially in inclement weather. It's windy and supposed to storm later. A decade dead and still I worry about him. Such an extrovert. He hated being alone. I've never been to his grave, the small postal box at the VA cemetery in the California desert. Why should I, when he shows up here every odd month or so? The rain's kicked up and the lights are flickering. The queue will lose power. The well will shut down, so we fill buckets of water, load the wood bin, wait. I thought he liked storms, but now I wonder if he shows up because of the quiet when there's not much to do but scramble eggs on the wood stove, read by Coleman lantern, listen to the stairs creak. I unlock the back door, go out to look. Nothing but shadow and whistle and the quiver of the house as the door slams shut. Isn't that such a Bainbridge poem? How many of you don't have a generator? Any not? Oh, you guys, this is the hardcore. We don't judge, but maybe a little bit. This poem is called Preparing the Ground. I'm digging up the wintered over chard and replanting them 12 inches apart. A chance for another season. A little reincarnation right here in my own garden, this dirt patch church where I pray, another word for pulling weeds, or crying, which is what I'm doing today on this 1 week anniversary of my friend no longer on this earth. She's now in the dappled leaf sky, yet also near because I hear her telling me, hey, look at that, meaning the teacup magnolia arcing herself in a pink cascade with the light splintered across the grass. She didn't get another season, even with all the infusions and specialists, with the participation in the big study with so much promise. When hospice came, everything happened fast, so I could only send her the message she better continue talking to me on the other side, because I planned to keep my end of the conversation going. Lord knows, in all these decades, we never ran out of things to talk about. I never imagined even these tubers I'm pulling up right now would outlast us, that I'll bury again, and still they will flower. You guys are so quiet. Are you? Is it good? Everybody okay? Okay, I'm going to read a few more, and then you're going to write. Is that okay? Okay. So, this poem is called "The Quick and the Dead." You guys, I have so many dead poems. I have so many dead poems. Like, I had to narrow it down to just a few of my dead poems. I'm deathy. I'm just deathy. So this poem was when what I write about in my book is that my husband had cancer. He had aggressive, advanced cancer, and had we had a very scary couple of years. And I had cancer at the same time, but he's an overachiever, so he had had to have the full meal deal, and I'm not. So I had clear margins and got off scot-free. It was my route was shorter and easier than his. So I have a lot of poems about that. So this poem is called "The Quick and the Dead." The footsteps of those on the other side, a constant in the house. Up and down the stairs, down the hall, sometimes a rumble, a flutter, then quiet. So I didn't know if it was something heard or felt. Like I wasn't sure if it was gas or a foot in my belly, those long ago months when I was brimming. Now I am gaunt, hollow, a sunken cave. And when I can't sleep, I sit on the back stoop and write out the math story problems of the doctor's predictions. 5-year survival rate with our youngest, now 8, equals mortgage payments minus health insurance, plus I can always work extra shifts. The floorboards creak in the sleeping house behind me as my dead pace. I come from a long line of warriors, evidently an enduring skill. I go in the house, say goodnight, and climb the stairs back to bed. I just never felt alone during that dark chapter of my life. So guess what? This poem is called "Talking to My Dead." In life, my father looked like Don Rickles, coiled, bald, menacing. So imagine my surprise when he came to visit with thick chestnut shoulder-length hair. Very distracting. He was talking about how he was spending time in Chicago, enjoying vintage wine, jazz. I interrupted, "But what was it like to die?" "No big deal," his ready reply. In the morning, I told my mother about our visit. She was hand-to-the-mouth horrified. He broke his sobriety, settling into the familiar huff from their 52-year marriage. I kind of love that so much. And my mother was mad at him because he drank wine on the other side. And he hated jazz. So she found that very annoying, and I thought it was hilarious. Okay. So this poem is called "What I Tell Rilke," and there's a line in this poem that like a dove flung from the dove cote, which is from a Rilke poem, the poet Rilke. Every morning, God corrals the soul back into the body, and we get another day. Sometimes God slips a soul into his pocket, and there it stays, snug, warm, and the body is left unmoored, bereft. Sometimes my soul returns to me weary, like the weight of a ball, light on the toss up, then heavier back in the hand. maybe my soul goes visiting. Maybe it found my grandfather, smoked Russian cigarettes, drank dark bourbon, the good stuff. When my father left his body in the rented bed in the dining room, I felt the rising and flight, his abrupt vacancy, an irretrievable distance, like a dove flung from the dovecot, first quiet, then its draw of wings. I'm less afraid when I remember something in me knows how to fly. Thank you. Okay, I think that's it. I think those are the poems. Those are some of my death poems, of my talking to those on the other side poems, which is, I think, a powerful, powerful thing. So I have a few more. I have another series of a few more poems if there's time at the very end. If you want more poems, I have another little series, but we'll save that should you want it. So now we're going to do a little writing, and there's something I want to talk about before we get going on this, because I have a secret agenda, and I'm going to come clean. And that is, if you're not already a poet, my agenda is that you'll leave one. You'll leave as one. Because I believe that poetry really is for everybody. And a lot of us have kind of I'm kind of curious when I meet people who have a closed door relationship or feel so outside of poetry. Poetry, of course, has been with us since we were in caves. You know, we sang songs, told stories, and had poems together. It's a universal. All cultures across time, across the world, there is poetry. There aren't very many universals, but poetry is a universal. So I'm curious about what, but yet a lot of times we feel outside poetry. And I feel outside of poetry, and I'm a poet. Like, I read the poems in the New Yorker, and I'm like, what the heck? I have no idea what they're talking about. This is what I think. I think that we are not used to doing things we're not good at, especially as grown-ups. Kids are more open to writing poetry because they're used to trying new things and to not be good at it. But adults, it's like if you've not made pie crust, you don't want to make a pie crust because you know it's going to be a crappy pie crust, you know? And it's the same thing, you know that sign for what's the sewing store? Esther's, that sign that says like learning to sew. What does it say? It's like you'll be bad. Initially you're bad, and then you learn, and then you're kind of bad, or something like that. I'm like, that could be for poetry. That's perfect. So, you know what? Here's the thing. I'm a terrible singer, but I sing in the car and I sing in the shower, loudly and proudly. So, you know, it's like I'm not a dancer or an athlete, but I like to move. So it's same thing with poetry. It's like try not to think in a binary way of good or bad. Try to approach it as that this is part of our human experience is writing poetry. And you're going to be bad when you start. It's going to be your first pie crust. You know, it's going to not hold together, and that's okay. But this idea of I think the self-criticism, is it good? That binary thinking of good, bad really keeps us from participating and relating to something that like I said, I'm kind of an evangelist for poetry. It's changed my life. It's been so incredible for me that I wish other people to not feel that they're outside this thing that's not necessary. Okay, I'll stop preaching. And so I have another thing to talk about process. And smarter people than me have come up with this. And I learned this from one of my first mentors, that there's three consecutive processes of writing, of creativity. And Araceli, I'm interested if you find this in your work too as a visual artist, is that when you first sit down to write or create, the first person to sit in the chair is the madman. And the madman it's pure id. It's just creative flow. And there's no thinking about if it's good or bad. There's no judgment. It's just create. It's just dipping into that cistern within you, and you just kind of write and just put things out. And so the madman is just creative flow. It's just go, 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 write. You take anything that comes, any spark, any ideas, you just write. Flow. And then the second phase is the carpenter. And the carpenter gets out his hammer and nails, and she shapes and maybe makes it into lines, maybe makes it into stanzas, and kind of shapes. And most of poeming is the carpenter. Most of it is just that revision, and write it. So you take this big pile of this free form stuff, and then you work it. And if you're me, work it. I'm a very slow writer. And then the last part of the process is the critic. And then and only then is the question, is this good? And going with a very, very critical eye. Now, I know musicians also and composers use this same process of the madman, the carpenter, and the critic. And the reason why this is important is that we start with the critic often. As we start right away, is this good? Or already with the carpenter of trying to make something as opposed to letting it flow. The carpenter and the critic will kill the madman. The madman in the chair can only be alone to let creative flow happen. So it's a really interesting way of thinking about creative process, is that to be kind of cognizant of who is in the chair. So we're going to do some exercises today. We're going to do a little bit of writing, and I'd encourage you to try to be in that flow state of just write, and don't criticize yourself, and don't judge, and don't worry about what it looks like. We're not going to be sharing our work. I'm not a believer in sharing new work because it's not done by the carpenter yet. And it's fragile. It's like a fragile new little preemie, and you just have to be very, very careful with that. So if we share, I'll share have people share like a word or a phrase or what the process was like. But when I teach workshops, I'm not a big fan of doing new work, because for some people love it, and some people it makes them immediately anxious, and anxiety kills creativity. So we can talk more about that, but does anybody have any questions or comments about that? So does everybody have something to write with? If you don't, we have a couple of notebooks here. And while we have it, we also have some three. We're a small enough group. If you have any questions, you can just ask us, because we're going to have a little Q&A. So here is the first prompt. The first prompt is, we're going to write a poem of direct address, like a letter to somebody on the other side. So you're going to tell your loved one, like Gabriella's poem and like my poem. You're going to tell them what you miss, and you're going to tell them what's new with you, like a newsie, a poem of direct address, where you tell your loved one what you miss about them and what's new. The gossip. And I'll give you about 4 minutes. Go ahead. Okay, let's wrap this up. So how was that? Was anybody surprised? Does anybody want to share their surprise? What surprised them? Christina, what happened?
I just find that a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah. Did anybody else? Yes, Alice.
I just kept going, and I didn't think that I was going to do that without getting into details. My mom passed 10 years ago. As a result, no relations got to my relationship with my relationship,
Uh-huh.
I didn't have to deal with the toxicity stuff.
Yeah.
It was just everything I missed about us.
Yeah.
I was free to do that. And
Yeah.
not have to think about
Them. Yeah. Did anybody notice that? Did anybody feel that awareness of the critic wanting to sit in the chair? Was that?
no, because you said not to.
Yeah, but it's still hard. I struggle with it, and I've been working on it for a long time. Did anybody have any struggles? Yeah. Yes. Do you want to share?
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I really appreciated that kind of framing, that kind of pep talk. I've written for a really long time, and that's still the dance I dance.
Yeah.
And like every new phrasing of how to approach that, every new tool in the toolkit, every new pronunciation of we can't let that stop the flow helps me. And seeing other people write with not letting the critic in the chair helps me. And so, yeah, I found it unrolling easily, even though it's a trepidatious topic for me.
Yeah.
I found my eagerness to keep going, keep going, keep going. And, not to share a whole lot, but one surprise was just the fun of verbs and like language. I found myself pulling out specific verbs and words that caught me by surprise in your poems. And without thinking about it, I wanted to put the phrase "stink of the soil in the rain" rather than "smell of the," and just the delight of that word "stink of the soil" was kind of like a breath on the page for me in the midst of, this heavy and light topic.
Obviously, an experienced writer because we love to steal verbs. Excellent move. Always a good move is to listen for other writers' verbs and to write those down. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, and I also really appreciated your crediting, you're making visible the dialogue you are having with others.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for that.
Anybody else have any surprise when they're in their writing? Yeah, awesome.
So I've written a lot about grief. I have a whole poetry collection about grieving people, and
Awesome.
regardless of whether I know them. So my hesitation with writing grief poems is, are they always going to be the same thing over and over
Yeah.
again? So I appreciated and was surprised by your reminder of the madman, which I need
Yeah.
to hone into a little more, because it allowed me to really embrace stream of consciousness
Yeah.
and to let it take me wherever it was going to go, and it ended up being surprising. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah.
So beforehand, you had let me know what the questions were going to be, what the cues were going to be, and so I kind of already had that before. So, okay, I kind of know who I'm going to talk about or who I want to write to, and I have plenty to choose from. But I don't know if it had something to do with what you were saying or when we met early, right before we started. But instead of all the people that I had running through my head, I wrote about my dog.
Oh, awesome.
And it was my letter to my dog.
Awesome.
So just lovely to have that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Awesome. Yes.
Very unexpected.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. We'll talk more about pets. Pets and grief. They teach us how to grieve. Awesome. Okay, ready to the next one? Okay. Actually, I'm going to read a poem first. This is I'm going to read a short poem. This next prompt will be about conjuring somebody. And conjure somebody, and maybe it even is a family member that you haven't met or it's been such a long time. This poem is called My Grandmother Comes to Ellis Island, 1923. I imagine you in steerage, alone, 16, with your rucksack and tin of biscuits, the cacophony of babies crying and you sleeping with your fingers in your ears. I imagine the letters you wrote in your mind to the baby you left in your sister's arms, your promise to return. You won't, but you don't know that yet. You'll never speak of him. I see you resolute in the long, slow line, in the vast, dark hall, your answers to the questions brisk. I see you step into the bright light, look up at the New York skyline, your hands a cap over your eyes. You'll never see your parents again. You'll never lose the look of being lost and determined. I stare at your sepia face almost a century later. Wish I could tell you the shame you carried was worthless, and the wild seed of hope that hovered at the edge of your dreams. Look at the eyes of my children, my grandchild. They're yours. So conjure someone. Let's take a few minutes. Conjure your someone in your past. Sit with him or her for a minute. Maybe a full minute. Longer than is comfortable. Then ask a question. Sit again another minute. Then answer it. I'll give you 5 minutes. Okay. So how was that one? What's that, harder? Yeah. That is a lot harder. Anybody surprised? Anybody find something a surprise? Anybody surprised with who showed up? Anybody have somebody show up who was not who they thought they were going to have show up? Why was it harder? Just harder. What do you want to say, Marianne?
Well, a couple of people showed up that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah?
And then I felt a little bit like, oh, I don't really want to ask them anything. They're gone, but it's like, yeah, well, you know.
We don't have it yet.
So I ended up kind of going back to, someone who we both know who's
Yeah.
gone. And what was interesting, though, was like with the first poem, with the first writing, well, I won't call it a poem, with the first writing, I think it was something I've gone over in my mind so many times. That it was easy
Yeah,
to
yeah,
write
yeah,
about.
yeah.
And this was something I haven't gone over and over again in my mind. So it just didn't come out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's really interesting. Marianne, yes. Marianne and I were at the deathbed of a mutual friend together, and we're with him in his final hours to say goodbye. And he was really past the point of words. And my last thing I said to him is, I asked him to continue talking to me when he's on the other side. And he said, he mustered up the energy to whisper, absolutely. Yeah, it was beautiful. Yeah, let's hear.
Well, the big surprise is I'm even doing this.
Good for
As
you.
Michelle knows, I'm not, I just came to take photos. But it's difficult because the person I'm trying to communicate with or write to is my younger brother who died some years ago. He was severely mentally ill and kind of made the rest of all of our lives in our family kind of terrible. And so when his body was discovered, alongside a road, I think our most of us felt just relieved that he was out of our lives. So it's, trying to address him after this period is really hard. And so I'm struggling, but I'm kind of getting there. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. You know what? That a poem is the place for those difficult conversations that you can write things that you wouldn't be able to otherwise, and to ask those questions and to say the what ifs. That's the poetry is that's where the magic happens. Is lean into it where there's no other opportunity, especially when there's a. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We do. Of course, we all do that. We compartmentalize. There are things that are, and you have to take your time with it of when it's time to. You can't push the river. Yes. Thank you for being the microphone runner arounder.
I love that. You can't push the river. Mary Oliver talks about, I think, the soft, silky thing. Like this collaborator, it's not about control. But anyways, I do find that oftentimes what's stopping my writing is fear of what I'm going to find myself saying that I don't feel ready to say. And on the other side of that is when I'm in the process of writing the poem and I feel the most fear and I write it anyways, that's often when my most powerful writing has come out. Powerful for me and nourishing for others.
Yeah. I've heard that. Thank you for bringing that up. That's a really important point. I've heard that described as those are the guards, that if you get past the guards, that's the treasure. So that when you come up to that point of resistance, if you want what you're writing about, that it's like, oh no, not going there. It's well protected. That you kind of stay there. That's a cue that there's treasure there to kind of take without pushing the river gently, gently, gently. Much compassion is to kind of keep leaning and keep leaning until there's an entry that you can go in. I do. We could spend a whole workshop just on that. That's kind of huge. Should we do another one? You good? Good for another one? You guys are a great game group. Okay, do you want me to read a poem first? Was that helpful? Okay, so this poem, I'll read the poem and then I'll talk about the prompt. Okay, I titled this What I Want to Believe, but I think if I had to edit this poem, I'd say I believe. I just cut it a little closer, so you can hear it either way when I read it to you, but I'll read it as it's written. I want to believe the hummingbird that helicoptered over my ear was my mother-in-law back for a visit. She whirled so close, I felt my hair vibrate. I held myself statuary in hope she'd linger, but she was off in seconds. She always liked to move. Sometimes, though, she sat at my kitchen table, lit Newport in one hand, screwdriver on the rocks in the other. I'd pour over Bon Appetit or Gourmet, making Paris Brise Chateau, warming cream and chocolate for ganache, or stirring bouillabaisse. She'd wave her cigarette at me. Fish sticks, she'd say. They'd love 'em. We baffled each other. She bought me Bisquick. I made her fig jam with port and rosemary. Once I brought a bouche de Noël to her holiday table next to her Jell-O banana pudding with Nilla wafers. I was insufferable, and she forgave me. Now my vegetarian daughter-in-law refuses dairy and sugar, brings her own spelt crackers and sunflower butter when they visit. I want to believe my mother-in-law can smell the gray-brown paste, that she hovers in her chenille bathrobe right outside my kitchen window. I miss her so much. And, we baffled each other. So I conjure her all the time. And so this poem is different from that poem, but this is a poem of thanks and praise. Write a list poem of somebody that you loved or appreciate more now than you did at the time. And write about what you appreciated about that person. My favorite line in this poem was, I was insufferable and she forgave me. It's one of my favorite lines I have I shared this once before at one of our readings, that I had to apply to something, and they said, what line in your poetry that you'd have tattooed on your body? And I think mine would be, I was insufferable, and she forgave me because I was so insufferable. So write a poem, a thanks and praise, a list poem of the things you appreciate about someone or what you've come to appreciate about someone. And be specific. So I'll give you 4 minutes. Okay, let's talk. So is anybody surprised? Did anybody get anything? Who got something? What did you get? How is it, you guys, how is it of not sharing your work? Anybody wish they could share their work? Is it okay to talk about? there's yes. But so okay, you can if you want. But also, I'm just so interested in process of kind of what you discovered. But tell me about what you discover.
What I discovered in appreciation, there's always, I don't know, I guess when that first came to mind, it's like appreciate the things that everybody else notices maybe about this person or whatever. And I noticed for me that this was one of my grandmother's. I was appreciating things that at the time would I'd be like, oh my God, oh, like things that drove me crazy, or just like things that our family would have little sayings to each other, like, oh my gosh, Nana's gonna say something, or just things like that.
Yeah.
And I just could see it in an appreciative way.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
I wish I had a penny for every time I have said since my mother's passing, don't push the river. She drove me nuts with her Zen Buddhism wisdom. And when I was in a stressful time, she would say, Alice, don't push the river. And then she would say, you already know everything there is that you need to know, but it won't be available to you until you're ready. And in my mind, I'm going, yada, yada, yada. And since she's died, I have said that so many times. You said it, I wrote it down, so we had a little conversation about that.
Oh, I love that so much. I love knowing that my sayings are annoying my kids to no end, and I hear that loud and clear. Yeah. Anybody else?
I have something to share over
Yes.
here. I'm also a writer when I'm not doing my BIMA work. That was a really interesting prompt for me because it made me realize that I was very much raised as a good little Christian girl to always place people on pedestals, both in the real world and beyond. And it made me realize that I needed to write a poem telling people, thank you for just being human and thank you for being gone.
Oh, yeah.
I need to give you the grace of just being rather than idealized or idolized.
Yes. Thank you for that. And I know I'm sounding like you raised a good Christian. I'm sounding like the preacher. Like that a poem can handle that. That can hold the paradox. You can say, thank you, and I need this space from you. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, awesome. Yes, Kathleen, there's a lot of room running.
Well, I was trying to conjure up my mother, who passed away some years ago, and she, and there are a lot of things I do during the day, and I feel like I am I am my mother all of a sudden. I'm becoming my mother.
It happens to
That's what
the
she
best
would
of
do.
us.
But what I realized when I was writing the poem was that I actually don't know her very well. She did not share a lot of her inner self, her disappointments and things. I wish she had, because it's too late now.
Yeah.
So anyway, I guess you'd call that a surprise. Yeah. She was good at, keeping her own counsel, and
Yeah.
So,
That's a really good point.
yeah.
Is how much we don't know the people closest to us because we're so in these roles sometimes. I think about that with my own children. I don't know how well my children know me, It's true. I think that's real life. And that's an important, that's a poet's question, to lean into. Yeah. Any other comments? Yes. Yeah.
I wrote about somebody who I knew as a child, and you were talking about the process part. I would say it's pretty bad writing.
That's good. Good. You have to write bad before you write good. Awesome.
But it was funny because it's all the things that, I remember this sort of idealized version of a person. And
Yeah.
I think, but I loved this. I mean, this person to me was like this, she was a cowgirl. She was a woman. She was older. She was in her 50s, and she lived on her own on a ranch out in the mountains. And
It's our dream.
she was
Everyone's dream.
She lived on, she
All of
was
our
like,
fantasy.
Anyway, so she was just like, how could somebody do that? Kind of thing. Anyway, so but how do you flush that out? That's what I'm sort of thinking of. How do you take a memory that maybe is just a little
Well,
twinkle?
here's the thing that's wonderful about poetry is that it's not investigative journalism. You get to make stuff up. You get to have an experience or a memory or a person, and there's all huge gaps. Like this, you have these. There's more holes in substance. You get to fill in the holes as a writer. You get to we make stuff up. You make stuff up. You just take what you have and you fill in the rest. Yeah, you get to do that. It's good to do that.
I was just going to add to the person before. The first poem, your instruction was to write what you missed about somebody. And I was writing about my dad and realized that what I missed the most was the missed opportunities. And so I thought that felt really rich. And I guess all these notebooks I'm leaving for my kids is what they're going to have.
Yep. Awesome. You guys, we are on time. I'm so impressed. I just can't even stand it. This has been a wonderful conversation. So we're going to have a little Q&A now. So we're just going to open up this conversation with Araceli and talk about the Day of the Dead as well and kind of weave all this in together. But before we get started, come on up and we'll talk. You know what? You have to write bad poems to write good poems, so welcome the bad ones. And these are baby poems that we wrote today, and my hope is that you'll continue to let the madman Adam, and then let the carpenter kind of fix them. And then a short plug for Poet Laureate program. We have readings every third Thursday at the library. I'm actually going to read. You heard me, so it'll be like not Michelle again. But I'm reading in November, and we do the Poet Laureate. Bainbridge Island Poet Laureate.com has our activities. We have lots of workshops and lots of things that we do. .org. Don't listen to me. Listen to Kathleen. Okay. 7:00 every third Thursday at 7, and then it's an open mic, so you can come and there's a reader for 20 minutes, and then open a fantastic open mic. So see you then. But we're going to now talk. I felt so at home yesterday with the Day of the Dead as a poet. Like, that was an amazing experience. I had not been to one before.
Oh.
And I'm still in a state of love.
Oh, I love that.
And it was so much a poet space of holding so many different things at once, of the grief and joy and celebration. It was absolutely amazing. And I want to thank you guys for the gift of that. That was
our pleasure, right?
yeah.
It's our pleasure, our treat to do it. And it is love. It comes from both of us, just it's pouring nothing but love into it.
And I love this of celebrating death and the vibrant colors. It's like it's such a statement of life, of how vivid life is. So could you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, I think that really speaks to the Latin culture. It's like there's color in everything. You rarely see things that are just dull or matted, not unless it's like pottery that's of the land, and even that means something, or black and white, again, pottery, and it's a statement, but color, yes, vibrancy in weavings and yarn that's created and pigments that come from the earth there. Yeah, it's all color. It's all in clothing, natural native clothing that they wear. It's always vibrant.
Araceli, your work blew me away, and the vibrancy in your work and the layering and the how the dimensionality to it. It read like a poem to me in terms of the layering. Like there was just so. The more you looked, the more you saw. So can you talk about that, about your work?
Oh, so first off, I am a very touchy person. Like to go to my husband jokes with me all the time. Like anywhere we go, I'm a very like I have to touch stuff. I have to touch people. I'm always like hugging or something. So I'm very much like that. So I really think that's what lended me to the three-dimensional. I think that's where that comes from, because I want to be touching it. And painting, I do some painting, but it doesn't fill me like the textile. Like you said, it's color, it's different materials, and oh my gosh, going to Esther's is forget it. I mean, oh my goodness.
Hey, tell us about Lily.
Lily Lady. Okay, yeah. So most of my artwork, it comes to me in images. So either mostly like dreams, but they're like reoccurring dreams, and I'll get little images of something. So she started with the lilies. So it was lilies that came in. It was in a conversation, and about a woman who had lost her daughter. And then it was this conversation of lilies being purity and childlike, and I don't know, the lilies just came up, and so it's just, how do I bring lilies into this, and just a mother figure, a woman, and then of course the marigolds on her head that represent.
Don't forget to see this on the way out. It's utterly stunning. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you.
It's right to the left
Right, the altar.
of the altar.
So yeah, she just kind of came. It was an image, and then the skull kind of her face sort of came, and it was very much like nature. So that's the embroidery on her face is all kind of lends to leaves and vines, and again growth, just transformation, turning into something else, and just leading around through her body, and yeah, that's where that came from, and just her holding that, and she's wearing real stones, her jewelry. She has bracelets, and she is wearing some necklaces, and all of those stones were carefully chosen. They all represent something, and I like stone, again, something I can hold, something you can touch, and but looking up the meaning for each stones, and most of those are all stones that you can find in Mexico. And
Gorgeous. And again, it reminds me of poetry in that it's the past and the present combined. It's, bones and death and flowers, and then the stones that are, carry us from the past to the present. And I love that, like these beads that have been touched by women,
right.
Countless.
And then you think
their stories that they carry.
they hold energy, just
Yeah.
stones, like people believe that they hold energy, and you wear them to represent something. So she needed jewelry.
She did. She wears it beautifully. Does anybody have any questions for us? What else do you want to talk about?
Well, we just a little bit of the history, just the artwork that I do. I started making quilts, and Ellis has one of my early quilts, because when I lost my grandparents, I was here. So all my family is from. I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. So I grew up very deep in this culture of mixed culture, just very, Latin culture is very well mixed in Tucson. You find it everywhere in the food and the naming of the streets. It's you walk down the street and you're hearing Spanish, English all the time, and that's what I grew up with at my home. My parents did not speak Spanish to us when we were younger because my father had a very bad experience going to school because that was a bad thing, and he was spoke to in Spanish at home, so he had trouble making that change of being in school and only speaking English, and so he was like, no Spanish growing up. So we weren't taught that, but the way I learned it was just from listening to my parents because I wanted to know what they were saying, and so you pay attention and you learn it that way. But my cousins and everybody, it's very sing-songy because it's Spanglish. It goes in and out, and there's even made-up words that. So I'm very cautious when I speak because I know it's not real Spanish because people just added at the end or whatever. And like my ofrenditas, like that too, I added an ita at the end because it's something that is small. It's smaller. So, but anyway, that's when it started. So I started making these quilts because I just really wanted to honor my grandparents at home and making my home altar. And then other people started seeing those and, can you make me one? And so that's kind of how it started. But then I really got into reading up about Mayan hieroglyphs, and just researching on that. And that's really something that's still evolving. Like they still don't know all the meaning behind and all the symbolism behind all the hieroglyphs. And so I dug in deep there, and then that really kind of transferred through the rest of my artwork, was just bringing in those hieroglyphs and kind of morphing them, not really using them true to exactly how they look, but I know that meaning is still there. So that's kind of woven into the artwork. So I dove deep into Mayan, and which led to Aztec culture. And that just was really interesting too. And from Alice and I just doing this, finding out about why do we celebrate Day of the Dead? Why are there sugar skulls on the ofrenda? Like, where did that come from? And I found out that the Aztecs, in honoring their families, what they would do is they kept their burials very close. And so a lot of times after they were buried for a while, they would they would dig them up and keep the head. And the head was then held under their homes so that they kept their ancestors close. Yeah. And so then after years, then the skulls were brought into the home to celebrate them, to commemorate them in that way. So that's where the whole skull, and it's just been passed down, and it changes, and now we do sugar skulls, and but it is very much in honoring.
I love that there are so many cultures of different ways of honoring the ancestors and bringing those who have gone before us with us, that they're always with us. I also loved your story about how, especially first and second generation, how we are separated from our culture because of our parents trying to protect us. And then this generation, how we're like reconnecting to that broken piece of it. And that's really interesting that this has been part of that for you too.
It has, and it's not really that I went searching for. I mean, it came in a very natural way. But I do notice as I'm getting older, I feel that deeply it is a part of me.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such an interesting common story of us.
Yeah, it's interesting just where that comes from, and how I guess it's that whole rooting, like it has to, you have that reconnection.
Yeah,
has to come out.
Yeah, and then again, those holes in us, the holes that we get to fill. Yeah, awesome. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for this beautiful display that's been here and letting everyone really get a flavor of the culture that some of us don't know anything about, have not been exposed to it before, and it is just lovely. So hopefully it will just keep on getting larger and larger, and it's just so awesome. So thank you. And Alice,
Thank you
very
for
much.
coming
Yes.
and learning about it. Yes, it's like we said, it's just been our privilege to do this and to see it grow.
I don't need a microphone. But in sitting here, reflecting on yesterday. Last year was our 10th anniversary. We exceeded the fire code, which is good, but that meant that we needed celebration. And poetry yesterday in both sessions was what really moved so many of us. I don't remember it being shared that much in past celebrations, but for those of you who were there yesterday for the first ceremony at 11 o'clock, a man named Robert came up to the microphone, bent over, challenged, a walking challenge. Araceli helped him by getting him into a chair, and because she's touchy-feely, she had her arm on him during that time. And he opened up about his battle with mental illness for 30 or 40 years. I can't remember what it was, but the reason he was up there was he wanted to read a poem that was dedicated to his dear friend who had spina bifida, and so he was a painter, and his hands were like this, and yet that poem was about how he did not let that disability and the pain keep him from doing what he loved to do, and I'm not doing justice to the poem. He has sent me that poem and 5 others since yesterday, so I feel like we have a new friend that I to have more connected to what is going on here and your poetry workshops that happen at the library every 3 weeks. But when he finished his poem, people clapped. And all the 10 years before, nobody has clapped during some sort of a sense of it being a solemn place. His clapping resulted in everybody else, when they shared, people clapped. And then in the 3 o'clock celebration happened again, where somebody read a poem and people started clapping. And my favorite moment was in this little girl about this big, 4 or 5 years old. She comes up to the microphone and she waits for somebody to lower it so that she can speak into the microphone. And she stood there and said, "I'm putting the flower and the candle on the ofrenda for my grandpa. He died and he's dead." and then this little girl, her little friend, comes up to her and so we have this older guy in the morning, and then whoever else that started it, and that to me was the most precious part of those ceremonies. And cross-generational, through poetry, people have opened their hearts and lives to.
You know what? I think you did a perfect job in closing us with that, Alice. That was perfect. Poetry thank you for welcoming poetry into the space. Now we have time for a little reception outside. There's some cookies. And so we're going to have yes, so we can continue talking. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.